The operating room fell silent the moment the laughter echoed against the sterile walls. It wasn't the beeping monitors or the steady rhythm of the ventilator that froze the air that day, it was humiliation. A world-renowned surgeon had just mocked a nurse's degree in front of an entire surgical team. He had smirked as though he'd crushed something insignificant beneath his polished shoes. And for a brief, painful moment, it seemed like he had. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that no one's worth should ever be measured by a title, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this matter, because people like this exist. Her name was Lieutenant Amelia Carter, though inside St. Matthew's Medical Center she was known simply as Nurse Carter. She wore her scrubs with quiet dignity, her badge clipped neatly at her collar, her movements precise and disciplined. Few people knew that beneath her calm composure was a resume that could silence any room. Fewer still understood why she had chosen to keep it hidden. Dr. Victor Langford was the hospital's crown jewel. Educated at the finest institutions, published in prestigious journals, featured in medical documentaries, his reputation preceded him into every room. He was brilliant, no one could deny that. But brilliance had hardened into arrogance over the years. He expected perfection. He demanded obedience. And he had little patience for anyone he believed beneath him. That morning's surgery was complicated, a vascular reconstruction on a retired colonel who had collapsed unexpectedly. The case was delicate, high risk, and under pressure from hospital administrators. Amelia stood at her station, monitoring vitals with the focus of someone who understood that one wrong number could mean life or death. When she quietly suggested an alternative dosage adjustment, citing potential instability in the patient's pressure, Dr. Langford didn't just dismiss her. He laughed. He laughed in front of residents, technicians, anesthesiologists, everyone. He questioned where she had learned to calculate risk. He made a comment about online nursing programs and playing doctor. He told her to leave the complex decisions to people with real degrees. The words didn't just sting. They cut. But Amelia didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She adjusted the monitor, stepped back, and continued her work. Her face remained composed, but inside, old memories resurfaced, training grounds at dawn, combat hospitals under desert skies, the weight of rank stitched onto her uniform long before she ever stepped into this civilian facility. Years earlier, Amelia had graduated top of her class from a military medical academy. She had served overseas in field hospitals where the sound of explosions replaced the hum of surgical lights. She had triaged soldiers with seconds to spare, stabilized injuries that textbooks barely covered, and earned commendations she kept locked in a drawer at home. She had worn her rank with pride then, Captain Carter of the United States Army Nurse Corps. But when her father fell ill back home, she had made a choice. She resigned her commission, moved to care for him, and took a position at St. Matthew's. She didn't advertise her past. She didn't ask for special treatment. She wanted a quieter life, one focused on healing without hierarchy. Unfortunately, the world rarely allows talented women to shrink without consequence. Days after the surgery, hospital leadership received an unexpected call. It wasn't from a donor, a board member, or a malpractice attorney. It was from the Pentagon. The request was specific. Urgent. Formal. They asked for Lieutenant Colonel Amelia Carter by rank and name. The administrative assistant thought it was a mistake. There was no lieutenant colonel on staff. But the caller insisted. They provided service numbers, commendations, dates of deployment. They explained that a high-profile military contractor, critically injured in a classified training accident, was being transferred under discrete circumstances. He had requested one medical professional by name, the nurse who had once saved his life in Kandahar when shrapnel had nearly ended it. He would not consent to surgery without her. The board panicked. They searched personnel files. And then they found it, buried beneath civilian paperwork, a record of Amelia's service. Promotions. Citations. A Silver Star recommendation that had been quietly declined because she had insisted she was just doing her job. By the end of the day, the hospital corridors buzzed with whispers. Dr. Langford was summoned to the boardroom. He walked in confident, slightly annoyed at the interruption to his research schedule. He walked out pale. The Pentagon's liaison team arrived that evening, dressed in crisp uniforms that seemed to carry authority in every crease. They did not ask for Nurse Carter. They addressed her properly, saluting her in the middle of the nurses' station as if they stood on a military base rather than polished hospital floors. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Amelia froze when she saw them. Not out of fear, but recognition. Memories rushed back like a flood breaking through a dam she had carefully built. The liaison officer briefed her quietly. The injured contractor was stable but deteriorating. The injury mirrored one she had treated years ago under fire. They believed her experience would be the difference between survival and catastrophe. She glanced around the station. Residents stared in disbelief. Technicians exchanged looks. And across the corridor, Dr. Langford stood motionless, the weight of realization settling on his shoulders. He had mocked a lieutenant colonel. He had belittled a decorated combat nurse. He had underestimated someone who had operated under mortar fire. Amelia could have declined. She had left that life behind. She had promised herself she wouldn't return to the chaos. But medicine, she believed, was never about ego or comfort. It was about responsibility. She agreed. The next 48 hours transformed Street Matthews into something resembling a secure facility. Armed guards stood discreetly near entrances. The operating room was reserved. Specialists were flown in. And at the center of it all stood Amelia, not as just a nurse, but as a leader whose calm steadiness anchored everyone around her. Dr. Langford was assigned as the primary surgeon due to his expertise. The irony was not lost on him. He requested a private meeting with Amelia before the procedure. He began to apologize, stumbling over words that felt foreign in his mouth. He admitted ignorance. He acknowledged arrogance. He said he had judged her without knowing her story. Amelia listened. She didn't gloat. She didn't lecture. She simply told him that titles don't make healers, choices do. And that in an operating room, humility saves more lives than pride. The surgery was grueling. Complications emerged exactly as Amelia had predicted days earlier in that other case. This time, when she suggested an adjustment, Dr. Langford didn't laugh. He nodded. He followed her lead without hesitation. Their teamwork was seamless, built not on hierarchy but mutual respect. Hours later, the patient stabilized. When the final stitch was placed, exhaustion washed over the team like a tide. And in that quiet, heavy silence, something shifted inside Dr. Langford. He realized that brilliance without compassion is incomplete. That expertise without listening is dangerous. News of the Pentagon's involvement spread beyond hospital walls despite attempts at discretion. Local media caught wind. Articles surfaced highlighting Amelia's service record. Patients began requesting her by name. Staff members who once overlooked her began seeking her guidance. But what changed most was not the hospital's perception, it was its culture. Dr. Langford initiated interdisciplinary briefings where every voice mattered, regardless of degree. He publicly credited Amelia during a medical conference for her role in the contractor's survival. He recommended her for a leadership position within the hospital's trauma program. Not out of obligation, but respect. Weeks later, a small ceremony was held in the hospital auditorium. It wasn't flashy. There were no cameras. Just colleagues gathered to recognize a truth that should have been obvious all along. The Pentagon liaison returned to formally acknowledge Amelia's service, presenting her with a commendation she had once declined. This time, she accepted, not for herself, but for every nurse who had ever been underestimated. Before the ceremony ended, she addressed the room. She spoke about quiet professionals who carry invisible histories. About the danger of assumptions. About the power of humility in medicine and in life. She didn't mention the mockery. She didn't need to. The lesson was already etched into every listener's heart. And now, before we reach the end of this story, I want to make a special request. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or judged too quickly, comment, "I know my worth," below. Let's fill this space with strength and solidarity. Amelia continued working at St. Matthew's, but she did so without shrinking anymore. She wore a small pin beneath her badge, a subtle symbol of her service. Not to intimidate. Not to boast. But to remind herself that she had earned every ounce of respect long before anyone offered it. Dr. Langford changed too. Arrogance gave way to mentorship. He began encouraging young nurses to pursue advanced education. He funded scholarships in Amelia's name for military medics transitioning to civilian careers. In private moments, he admitted that being corrected had saved more than a patient, it had saved him from becoming the worst version of himself. The contractor eventually recovered. Before being discharged, he requested to see Amelia. He stood with difficulty, saluted her despite hospital protocol, and thanked her for saving his life twice, once in war, and once in peace. Tears filled the eyes of staff who witnessed the exchange. They finally understood that heroism doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears scrubs. Sometimes it stays silent. The memory of that first laugh in the operating room never completely disappeared. But it transformed, from a wound into a reminder. A reminder that dignity cannot be stripped by someone else's ignorance. That true rank isn't stitched on fabric, it's revealed in character. As Amelia walked through the hospital corridors months later, the air felt different. Not because people feared her, but because they respected her. The culture had shifted from hierarchy to humanity. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that no one should ever be judged by appearances or titles, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your engagement helps stories like this reach people who need hope today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate courage, compassion, and second chances. Because sometimes, the loudest lesson in a room begins with a whisper of humility, and ends with an entire institution learning how to listen.